Dust and a desperate deal. Dust devils danced across the cracked earth of what Dusty Rivers stubbornly still called a ranch. The wind, a constant companion in these parts, howled through the skeletal remains of a windmill, its blades long gone, scavenged for scrap. His boots crunched on the parched ground as he surveyed the scene. A broken-down fence line, a barn with a caved-in roof, and the pathetic excuse for a vegetable garden his wife, bless her soul, had tried to coax to life before. He swallowed hard, the familiar ache of grief a constant resident in his chest. The bank was breathing down his neck. Foreclosure papers were practically stapled to his front door. He'd tried everything, selling off livestock, taking on odd jobs in town, even swallowing his pride and asking his brother for help, a conversation he still regretted. Nothing had worked. The ranch, his family's legacy for generations, was slipping through his fingers like sand. A cloud of dust announced the arrival of a vehicle. A shiny black Cadillac, looking utterly out of place against the backdrop of his dilapidated property, pulled up to the gate. Clarence Gable emerged, adjusting the lapels of his impeccably tailored suit. He was the picture of city slickness, his polished shoes gleaming even under a layer of dust. Dusty knew the type, all charm and no substance. "Mr. Rivers?" Gable's voice was smooth, like aged whiskey. "That's me," Dusty replied, his voice rough from the dust and disuse. "Clarence Gable. I believe you know my aunt, Mrs. Eleanor Gable." Dusty knew of her. Everyone in town knew of the wealthy, reclusive Mrs. Gable, who lived in a sprawling mansion on the outskirts. He'd seen her once or twice, a frail, bird-like woman being chauffeured around town. "I'm sorry for your loss," Dusty mumbled, assuming that was the purpose of the visit. Gable waved a dismissive hand. "Yes, well, these things happen. Age, you know. But I'm here on a business matter." He paused, glancing around at the decaying ranch with thinly veiled disdain. A rather unusual one, perhaps. Dusty braced himself. He had a feeling he wasn't going to like what was coming. "My aunt had specific instructions regarding her burial," Gable continued, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "She wished to be interred privately, discreetly, away from prying eyes and gossiping tongues." Dusty frowned. "And you need me to handle the, shall we say, arrangements, to prepare the site, to ensure her wishes are carried out to the letter." Gable pulled out a thick envelope from his inside pocket. Naturally, there would be compensation. Dusty's gaze flickered to the envelope, then back to Gable. The implications of what he was being asked to do began to dawn on him. "You want me to bury her? Without a funeral? Without proper rites?" Gable's smile tightened. "Think of it as a personalized service. My aunt valued her privacy above all else. And, frankly, the less attention this attracts, the better for everyone involved." He flicked the envelope suggestively. "The sum is substantial, Mr. Rivers. Enough to alleviate your current difficulties, I suspect." Dusty's stomach churned. The idea of burying someone in secret like some kind of outlaw felt wrong. Deeply wrong. But the image of the foreclosure notice, the despair in his wife's memory, the thought of losing everything his family had worked for. He looked at the envelope again, its edges crisp and new. He knew what was in there, a lifeline, a chance to save everything he held dear. "Where would she be buried?" Dusty asked, his voice barely a whisper. "There's a secluded spot on her property, overlooking the valley. She always loved the view." Gable's smile widened, sensing his victory. Perfectly peaceful, perfectly private. Dusty ran a hand through his hair, the grit and grime clinging to his skin. He felt like he was wading through mud, each step sinking him deeper into something he knew he shouldn't be doing. "And the authorities?" he asked, grasping at straws. "What about the death certificate? The legalities?" "All taken care of, Mr. Rivers. Don't you worry your head about that. I assure you, everything is perfectly above board." Gable's eyes glinted with something that looked suspiciously like amusement. Dusty knew, with a certainty that settled like a stone in his gut, that nothing about this was above board. But the desperation clawing at him was stronger than his conscience. He looked out at his broken-down ranch, at the fields that had once yielded so much, at the house where he had built a life, a family, a future, all of it threatened by the stroke of a pen, the indifference of a bank. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made a deal with the devil. "All right," he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "I'll do it." Gable's smile became genuine, almost predatory. "Excellent. I knew I could count on you, Mr. Rivers. I'll have the package delivered tomorrow morning. Discreetly, of course. And the payment will be transferred to your account immediately upon completion. Consider it a fresh start." He turned to leave, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. As he slid back into the Cadillac, he paused, rolling down the window. "And Mr. Rivers," he said, his voice low and menacing, "discretion is paramount. This conversation never happened. You understand?" Dusty nodded, unable to speak. The Cadillac sped away, leaving him standing in the dust, the weight of his decision heavier than any he had ever carried. He looked out at his ranch, no longer seeing a home, but a tomb he was about to defile. Gable Mansion. The wrought iron gates loomed larger than any he'd seen, each twist and flourish a testament to a wealth Dusty couldn't fathom. As Clarence punched in a code on the keypad, Dusty stared past the barrier, his beat-up pickup feeling woefully out of place on the pristine, tree-lined drive. The mansion itself, when it finally came into view, was a sprawling monument of stone and glass, a stark contrast to the weathered wood and honest dirt of Rivers Ranch. He felt a lump form in his throat, a mixture of awe and a profound sense of inadequacy. Clarence guided the truck around a circular drive, stopping before a set of imposing double doors. "Wait here," he instructed, stepping out. Dusty watched as Clarence disappeared inside, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the oppressive silence of the manicured grounds. He killed the engine, the sudden quiet amplifying the chirping of unseen birds and the distant hum of what he guessed was an elaborate water feature. He climbed out, stretching his stiff back. The air here smelled different, cleaner, less like manure and more like flowers. Expensive flowers. He ran a hand over the truck's dented fender, the metal rough beneath his calloused fingers. This was a world away from everything he knew, a world he didn't belong in. Clarence reappeared, holding the door open. "Come on," he said, his voice lacking any warmth. "Let's get this over with." Dusty followed him into the house, his boots echoing on the polished marble floor. The entryway was vast, a cavernous space filled with sculptures and artwork that meant nothing to him. A crystal chandelier, the size of his entire living room, hung precariously overhead, casting a dazzling light that made him squint. "Impressive, ain't it?" Clarence said, a hint of pride in his voice. "My aunt certainly knew how to live." Dusty mumbled a non-committal agreement, his eyes darting around, trying to take it all in. It was almost too much, too opulent, too fake. He preferred the honest simplicity of his own home, even with its peeling paint and leaky roof. Clarence led him down a long hallway, lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women in elaborate gowns. Their eyes seemed to follow him, judging him. He felt like an intruder, a trespasser in a world that was never meant for him. "This way," Clarence said, stopping before a door at the end of the hall. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the ornate doorknob. She's in here." He pushed the door open, revealing a bedroom bathed in soft, filtered light. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and something else, something vaguely medicinal. A large four-poster bed dominated the room, its curtains drawn back to reveal a figure lying still beneath a silk comforter. "She passed peacefully in her sleep," Clarence said, his voice carefully neutral. "Just as she always wanted." Dusty stepped into the room, his gaze drawn to the figure in the bed. Mrs. Gable looked smaller than he expected, her face pale and drawn, her thin gray hair neatly arranged on the pillow. He couldn't detect any rise or fall of her chest, any sign of life. She looked like a porcelain doll, fragile and breakable. The room was filled with expensive furniture, antique dressers, and gilded mirrors reflecting the soft light. A small table next to the bed held a collection of pill bottles and a half-empty glass of water. Everything was meticulously arranged, perfectly in its place. He approached the bed cautiously, his boots silent on the thick carpet. He needed to see her, to make sure, to make sure she was truly gone. Clarence was paying a lot of money, and Dusty wasn't about to risk everything on a lie. He leaned closer, his eyes searching for any sign of life. Her skin was cool to the touch, her lips slightly parted. He reached out, hesitantly, and placed his fingers on her wrist, searching for a pulse. Nothing. She's gone, all right, he said, straightening up. Just like you said. Clarence nodded, his face impassive. Good. Then let's get started. He gestured towards the bed. I'll leave you to it. I have arrangements to make. He turned and left the room, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Dusty alone with the silent figure in the bed and the weight of the task ahead. The cat's vigil. The air in the room hung heavy, thick with the scent of potpourri and something else, something like old linen and faded perfume. Dusty took a tentative step towards the bed. Mrs. Gable lay still beneath a silk coverlet, looking smaller somehow than he remembered from the photograph Clarence had shown him. He needed to get a move on. The sooner he got her situated, the sooner he could get back to the ranch. A low growl, a guttural rumble that vibrated through the quiet room, stopped him. He looked down. A marmalade cat, fat and sleek, sat perched on the edge of the bed, its green eyes fixed on Dusty with an intensity that made the hair on the back of his neck prickle. Patches, he figured. Clarence had mentioned a cat. Easy there, kitty, Dusty said, his voice a little rougher than he intended. He held out a hand, palm up, hoping to offer a gesture of peace. Just need to check on the lady. Patches didn't buy it. The growl intensified, morphing into a hiss that revealed a flash of pink tongue and surprisingly sharp teeth. The cat's back arched, its fur standing on end like tiny, electrified needles. It was a formidable display from a creature that looked like it should be content to nap in a sunbeam. Dusty retracted his hand slowly. This wasn't going to be as simple as he'd hoped. He'd dealt with skittish horses and ornery bulls, but a protective cat was a new kind of challenge. He wasn't a cat person per se. Back on the ranch, cats were mousers, practical creatures, not pampered pets guarding corpses. He tried a different approach. He lowered himself to a crouch, trying to appear less threatening. Hey, Patches, he said, his voice soft and soothing. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt her. I just need to help her. Help her what? He didn't even have the words to articulate the grim task ahead. Patches blinked slowly, but the intensity in its gaze didn't waver. It was as if the cat understood exactly what he was planning, and it wasn't about to let him get away with it. Dusty had a sudden, unsettling feeling that he was being judged, not just by a pet, but by something ancient and knowing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of jerky, a habit from the ranch. Here, he offered. Want a snack? The jerky, usually irresistible to his own dogs, was met with disdain. Patches wrinkled its nose, as if offended by the very suggestion. It was clear that bribery wasn't going to work. Dusty sighed. He glanced at the closed door, then back at the cat. He couldn't just leave. Clarence was expecting him to get this done, and he desperately needed the money. His ranch, his whole life depended on it. He stood up slowly, trying not to startle Patches. All right, kitty, he said. We're going to do this the hard way. He grabbed a silk scarf from a nearby table, the fabric cool and smooth in his hand. He wasn't sure what he was going to do with it. Maybe try to distract the cat. Maybe he didn't have a plan, just a desperate need to get past this furry obstacle. As he took another step towards the bed, Patches leaped, not at him, but onto Mrs. Gable, settling possessively on her chest. Its green eyes blazed, daring him to come closer. Dusty froze. He'd never seen a cat act like this. It wasn't just protecting its owner. It was defending her. It was as if Patches sensed that something was profoundly wrong, that the stillness wasn't peaceful, but stolen. He looked at Mrs. Gable, at the slight rise and fall of her chest beneath the cat. He hadn't noticed it before, too focused on the cat's theatrics. He stared harder. There was again, almost imperceptible, but definitely there. Her chest was moving. A wave of nausea washed over him. He'd been about to bury a living woman. The cat knew. Somehow the cat knew. Eyes wide open, Dusty swallowed, the metallic tang of fear coating his tongue. He reached, his fingers trembling, towards Mrs. Gable's frail wrist to check for a pulse he was increasingly sure wouldn't be there. Just as his fingertips brushed against her cool skin, her eyelids fluttered. Once, twice. Then, with a startling suddenness, they opened. Dusty recoiled as if burned. He stumbled backward, knocking against a rough-hewn table, sending a stack of neatly arranged newspapers tumbling to the floor. The clatter echoed in the sudden, thick silence. Mrs. Gable's eyes, a startling shade of blue against the paleness of her skin, were wide and unfocused. They blinked slowly, as if struggling to process the light. She stared directly at Dusty, but he doubted she saw him. Her pupils were dilated, swallowing almost all of the blue. "Lord have mercy," Dusty whispered, his voice hoarse. He hadn't killed her, but he'd almost buried her alive. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea churning in his gut. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Patches, who had been a silent, watchful presence near Mrs. Gable, let out a low, guttural growl, his back arched, every muscle tense. He didn't understand, but he knew something was wrong. Dusty forced himself to breathe, deep, shuddering breaths. He had to think. He couldn't just run. He was already in too deep. "Mrs. Gable," he asked, his voice wavering. He stepped cautiously closer, his eyes fixed on her face, searching for any sign of recognition. Her lips moved, forming a silent word. Or perhaps a sigh. He couldn't be sure. "Can you hear me?" He knelt beside her, ignoring the protesting creak of his knees. He took her hand, surprised by how cold it felt. It was like holding a piece of ice. Her fingers twitched faintly in his. Her gaze, still unfocused, drifted around the room, landing on the dusty bookshelf, then the faded floral wallpaper, finally returning to his face. "Water," she rasped, her voice barely audible. Dusty scrambled to his feet. Water coming right up." He hurried to the sink, his hands shaking so badly he fumbled with the faucet. He filled a glass, the water sloshing over the rim and onto the counter. He rushed back to her side, kneeling again. He gently lifted her head, supporting it with one hand while he held the glass to her lips with the other. She swallowed weakly, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. Some of the water dribbled down her chin. "Easy now," he murmured, wiping her chin with his sleeve. She opened her eyes again, and this time there was a flicker of something in them. Not recognition, not exactly, but a spark of awareness. "Oh, who are you?" she whispered, her voice stronger this time. Dusty hesitated. What could he say? What should he say? The truth was impossible. A lie was all he had. I'm a friend," he said, hating the way the words tasted in his mouth. "A friend of the family. I'm just checking in on you." Her brow furrowed, a faint line appearing between her eyes. "Family," she repeated, her voice laced with confusion. I don't have any family." Dusty cursed inwardly. He was making a mess of this. "Well, a friend of a friend, then," he stammered. "Someone who cares about you." She looked at him, her blue eyes searching his, and for a fleeting moment, Dusty felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost brought him to his knees. This woman, this frail, disoriented woman, had almost been a victim of his desperation. Where am I?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're home, Mrs. Gable," Dusty said softly. "You're safe at home." He wasn't sure if she believed him, but she didn't argue. She closed her eyes again, her breathing becoming more regular. Dusty watched her, his mind racing. He had to figure out what to do. He couldn't just leave her here, not in this state. And he certainly couldn't bury her. But what else could he do? He was trapped. Patches nudged his hand with his head, purring softly. It was a tentative gesture, a cautious offering of comfort. Dusty reached out and stroked the cat's soft fur, finding a strange sense of solace in the simple act. He was in over his head, way over his head, and somehow a cat and a woman who should have been dead were the only things standing between him and complete ruin. He took a deep breath and began a plan. A doctor's diagnosis. Dusty recoiled from Mrs. Gable, as if stung, his pulse a frantic drum solo against his ribs. "Just stay put," he croaked, retreating towards the antiquated phone clinging to the kitchen wall. His sweaty palms made a miserable mess of the receiver. He spun the crank. The bell's shrill cry shattered the quiet. "Operator, doque vans, stat." The words burst from him. He pivoted back to Mrs. Gable, now upright, her gaze adrift, a mask of bewilderment creasing her features. "Friend?" she rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Dusty swallowed against a throat suddenly full of cotton. "Yes, ma'am. Friend." He attempted a reassuring smile, praying it looked less like a grimace. The operator's voice, tinny and distant, filled the void. Connecting. Each ring hammered at Dusty's temples. At long last, a gravelly voice. "Evans." "Doc, it's Dusty Rivers. Need you at my place." "Urgent." "It's Mrs. Gable." A beat of silence. "Eleanor Gable? What in creation? Just get here, document. Please." He slammed down the receiver, his hand trembling so violently he nearly lost his grip. He turned to find Mrs. Gable struggling to her feet, her legs unsteady. Dusty lunged forward, offering support. Her skin felt unnervingly delicate, like parchment stretched taut. "Easy now, ma'am. Take it slow." He guided her back down, his mind a whirlwind of desperate inventions. He needed a plausible explanation, and he needed it now. The ticking clock amplified the agonizing weight. Dusty stalked the confines of the cabin, raking his fingers through his already unruly hair. He couldn't shake the sight of Mrs. Gable, sitting silently, her eyes fixed on some unseen horizon. The air was thick with unspoken anxieties and the earthy tang clinging to his clothes. A plume of dust heralded the arrival of Doc Evans Batterford. The doctor, his face a landscape etched with the harsh realities of decades spent in service, emerged, his worn black bag clutched tightly. "Dusty, what in damnation is going on?" Evans demanded, his eyes narrowed, taking in Dusty's agitation, Mrs. Gable's disoriented state, and the pervasive air of unease. "It's complicated, Doc," Dusty began, then thought better of it. "She just appeared. Claimed she didn't remember how she got here." Evans grunted, unconvinced. He approached Mrs. Gable with measured steps. "Mrs. Gable, can you hear me clearly?" Mrs. Gable blinked, focusing on the doctor. "Yes, I believe so. Where am I?" Evans gently palpated her wrist, checking her pulse. "You're at Dusty Rivers' cabin, ma'am. Now let's see what's what." He commenced his examination, scrutinizing her eyes, listening to her lungs, his brow creasing deeper with each passing moment. Straightening, his expression was somber. "She's been drugged, Dusty. Heavily. Some kind of sleeping draft, but a potent one." Dusty feigned a surprised look. "Drugged? But how?" Evans gave him a look that suggested he'd seen through thicker lies. "That's what I intend to find out. Severely dehydrated and out of sorts. Someone wanted her incapacitated for a good while." He softened his tone, addressing Mrs. Gable. "Mrs. Gable, do you recall being given something to drink?" Mrs. Gable shook her head slowly, her eyes clouded with confusion. "No, nothing. Just a void." Evans sighed. "Dusty, you say she just showed up? Any idea who might have done this?" Dusty hesitated, his mind a trapped animal. He couldn't reveal the truth. Not yet. "No, Doc. None at all. Maybe someone from town? She has considerable wealth, you know." Evans nodded thoughtfully, stroking his chin. "A possibility. Someone after her money. Or perhaps someone who wanted her conveniently absent." He fixed Dusty with a piercing stare. "This whole situation stinks, Dusty. To high heaven." The silence in the cabin was a tangible thing, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the sporadic crackling of the fire, each snap and pop a stark reminder of his precarious position. He was ensnared, caught between his desperate need for cash and the growing dread that he'd stumbled into something far more sinister than he could have conceived. And Mrs. Gable, frail and disoriented, held the key to unraveling it all. Nephew's gambit. The next morning, Dusty felt like he'd aged a decade. The weight of his secret pressed down on him, thick and suffocating. He had to tell Clarence Gable. But how? He found Clarence at the Mercantile, impeccably dressed as always, a stark contrast to the dust-caked farmers and ranchers milling about. Clarence was examining a bolt of fine silk, a bored expression on his face. "Clarence," Dusty said, his voice rough. Clarence turned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features before he smoothed it into a polite smile. "Dusty, everything taken care of." Dusty swallowed. "There's been a complication." He lowered his voice, pulling Clarence towards a quieter corner of the store. "Mrs. Gable, she's alive." Clarence's reaction wasn't what Dusty expected. He didn't explode in anger or panic. Instead, his face paled slightly and his eyes narrowed. "Alive? That's impossible." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a silver cigarette case. His hand trembled slightly as he lit one. "What do you mean, alive?" Dusty recounted the events of the previous night, omitting Doc Evans' involvement. He painted it as a miracle, a medical anomaly. Clarence listened in silence, the cigarette burning low between his fingers. "And she remembers nothing?" Clarence finally asked, his voice low and strained. "Nothing," Dusty confirmed. "Doc, a friend, says it could be temporary. Alpelmano." Clarence took a long drag of his cigarette, his gaze fixed on the floor. "This changes everything," he murmured. "Everything." He flicked the cigarette but onto the wooden floor and crushed it under his heel. "I need time to think, Dusty. Don't do anything. Understand?" Dusty nodded, feeling a shiver crawl down his spine. Clarence's calm demeanor was more unsettling than any outburst could have been. He didn't seem concerned for his aunt. He seemed concerned for himself. He watched Clarence leave the Mercantile, the silk bolt forgotten on the counter. The man moved with a newfound tension, his usual swagger replaced by a hurried, almost furtive pace. Dusty decided he needed to know more about Clarence Gable. He started his inquiries subtly, drifting around the saloon that evening, nursing a beer and listening to snippets of conversations. He asked casual questions about Clarence, framing them as harmless curiosity. "Here, tell Clarence Gable's been spending a lot of time in Cheyenne lately," Hank, the bartender, said, wiping down the counter. "Said he's got business there." "Business, huh?" Dusty replied, taking a sip of his beer. "What kind of business?" Hank shrugged. "Don't rightly know, but I hear tell Cheyenne's got some high-stakes poker games these days." Dusty filed that away. He spent the next few days nosing around, talking to ranchers, shopkeepers, anyone who might have information about Clarence Gable. He learned that Clarence had a penchant for gambling, a habit he kept carefully hidden from the town's social circles. He also learned that Clarence, despite his apparent wealth, was deeply in debt. Old Man Hemlock, the town's resident gossip, confirmed Clarence's financial woes. "That boy's been living beyond his means for years," Hemlock cackled, his eyes gleaming with malicious glee. "His daddy left him a tidy sum, but he's been squandering it faster than a drunken sailor on shore leave. I hear tell he's got some serious debts down in Cheyenne, enough to make a grown man sweat." The pieces were starting to fall into place. Clarence needed his aunt's money, desperately. Dusty rode out to the Gable Ranch, pretending to check on the water lines. He poked around the outbuildings, his eyes scanning for anything that might shed light on Clarence's activities. In the barn, hidden beneath a pile of old canvas tarps, he found it. A ledger. Dusty flipped it open, his heart pounding in his chest. The ledger was filled with numbers, dates, and cryptic entries. Most of it was gibberish, but one section caught his eye. It was a record of gambling debts, listing amounts that would make even a wealthy man wince. And at the bottom, a single, chilling entry: debt settled. Final arrangement. Sigil. Dusty closed the ledger, his hands trembling. Clarence Gable hadn't just been burying his aunt. He'd been burying his own financial problems. And Dusty Rivers had become an unwitting accomplice. Patches leads the way. Patches, the calico, proved a truer guide than any chart. Ever since Dusty's fraught encounter with Clarence, the cat had been a whirlwind of anxiety, her insistent meows and pacing centered on the grandfather clock in the parlor. Now, she clawed at the adjacent wood paneling, a relentless rasp against the stillness. "All right, settle," Dusty breathed, dropping to her level. His fingers traced the smooth wood, searching for weakness. It felt impenetrable. Applying pressure, he probed along the edges until, near the floor, a nearly invisible give answered his persistence. A click, soft as a sigh, unlocked a section of the paneling, revealing a shadowed recess. Patches vanished within. Dusty hesitated. This wasn't happenstance. This was a carefully guarded secret. He glanced towards the hall, a cold dread unfurling in his gut. Every fiber urged retreat, to unsee, to forget. Yet, a morbid curiosity, a compulsion fueled by unfolding events, kept him tethered. He ignited his Zippo, the tiny flame etching the hidden space into existence. A cramped chamber lined with shelves. Glass vials filled with amber liquid stood shoulder to shoulder, each bearing a delicate, handwritten label. He lifted one, squinting. Somnium Vitae, the elegant script declared. Sleeping life. The same insidious brew he'd found in Mrs. Gable's tea. His gaze swept the room, snagging on a small table tucked into the corner. Atop it lay a single sheet of paper, bathed in the flickering light. His heart hammered as he reached for it. The message was brief, its words a frantic scrawl. Ensure complete success this time. Eliminate all possibility of future complications. No signature, but the menace thrummed from the stark prose. Clarence. The thought struck him like a blow. The gambling debts, the unsettling calm, the access to the drug. The pieces clicked together with chilling precision. He'd been so consumed by the logistics of the burial, the moral quagmire, he had overlooked the glaring truth. He was tangled in a web spun by a potential murderer. He regarded the vials of Somnium Vitae anew. Dozens, enough to lull Mrs. Gable into weeks, even months, of slumber. A creeping horror took root. Clarence hadn't merely sought her absence. He'd orchestrated a slow, silent fading, a natural death too seamless to arouse suspicion. Patches brushed against his leg, a rumbling purr vibrating through him. He stroked her soft fur, finding solace in her feline presence. "You knew, didn't you?" he murmured, sensed something foul in the air. Rising, his limbs heavy as stone, he knew he had to extract Mrs. Gable, spirit her away from Clarence's reach. But where? He couldn't involve the authorities. He was complicit, however unknowingly. And who would believe his outlandish tale? A desperate rancher's claims of being hired to bury a woman alive by her avaricious nephew? It reeked of madness. He was alone in this. He had to safeguard Mrs. Gable, and somehow salvage his own reputation. The odds were a suffocating weight, but he possessed one advantage: knowledge of the truth. And Patches, the perceptive calico, at his side. He carefully closed the secret panel, the click echoing in the stillness. Extinguishing the Zippo, he re-entered the parlor, the oppressive weight of his discovery settling upon him. He glanced at the grandfather clock, its rhythmic tick a relentless measure of his dwindling time. A plan was paramount, and it was needed now. He looked down at Patches, her gaze unwavering. "All right, girl," he whispered, his voice thick with urgency. "Let's get her out. Confrontation and capture." Dusty scrubbed the sweat from his brow, the damning note still clutched in his hand. Somnium Vitae, the sleep of life. Fittingly morbid. He had to confront Clarence. Now, he found it by the barn, ostensibly checking the tack. Clarence leaned against the weathered wood, a picture of casual indifference, but Dusty noticed the way his jaw tightened as he approached. "Clarence," Dusty began, his voice dangerously low. He held out the vial and the note. "Care to explain this?" Clarence's eyes darted to the vial, then to the crumpled note. His carefully constructed facade of calmness cracked. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb with me. This came from a hidden room beneath your aunt's study. This vial, this sleep of life, is slowly poisoning her. And this note," Dusty shook it, the paper rattling like bones. "This note makes it pretty clear you're the one behind it." Clarence scoffed, a nervous energy radiating from him. "That's absurd. You're making wild accusations. Dusty, You're obviously trying to distract from the fact that you buried my aunt alive. Dusty fought to keep his anger in check. She wasn't dead, Clarence. I found her alive, and now I know why she's been so unresponsive. Clarence took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Look, Dusty, let's be reasonable. This is all a misunderstanding. Maybe you just found some old medicine. My aunt has a lot of eccentric remedies. This isn't some old remedy, Clarence. This is poison, and you were going to kill her for what? The inheritance. Clarence's eyes flickered, betraying him. He straightened his posture, attempting to regain control. Even if what you're saying is true, which it isn't, who would believe you? You're a desperate rancher who was paid to bury a woman in secret. Your word against mine. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of bills. Think about it, Dusty. This could solve all your problems. Enough to pay off the bank, start fresh. Just forget about all this. Leave town. Disappear. The offer hung in the air, a tempting but tainted fruit. Dusty's fingers tightened around the incriminating note. You think I can be bought, Clarence? You think I'm that desperate? Clarence's mask slipped entirely. His eyes narrowed, and his voice hardened. Everyone has a price, Dusty. You just have to find theirs. Dusty tossed the money back at him. The bills scattered in the dust, mocking Clarence's attempt at bribery. Mine isn't low enough to let you kill your aunt. Clarence lunged. He was surprisingly strong, his hands reaching for Dusty's throat. Dusty stumbled backward, the note flying from his grasp. He managed to block the initial attack, but Clarence's momentum pushed him against the barn wall. They grappled, a desperate struggle for control. Dusty, fueled by adrenaline and righteous anger, fought back, landing a blow to Clarence's jaw. Clarence staggered, but quickly recovered, his face contorted with rage. Suddenly, a black blur launched itself into the fray. Patches, who had been silently observing the confrontation, sprang onto Clarence's back, claws extended. Clarence roared in pain and surprise, flailing his arms wildly. He lost his grip on Dusty, stumbling backward. Dusty seized the opportunity. He grabbed Clarence's arms and twisted them behind his back, forcing him to his knees. He wrestled him to the ground, pinning him beneath his weight. "Stay down, Clarence," Dusty growled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He grabbed a length of rope lying nearby and quickly bound Clarence's hands and feet. Clarence spat at Dusty. "You haven't won, you idiot. You have no proof." "I have enough," Dusty said, tightening the knots. "The note, the vials, your ridiculous attempt to bribe me. It's all going to come out." Dusty didn't have to wait long. The sound of a vehicle approaching broke the tense silence. A moment later, Sheriff Brody's truck rumbled into the yard. Brody stepped out, his face grim. "What's going on here, Dusty?" Dusty gestured to the bound Clarence. "I caught him trying to poison his aunt, Sheriff. I found the evidence in a hidden room in her study." He pointed to the scattered bills on the ground. "He even tried to bribe me to keep quiet." Brody's gaze shifted between the two men, his expression unreadable. He knelt down, examining the rope binding Clarence's wrists. "He's lying," Clarence shouted, his voice strained. "Dusty's the one who tried to bury my aunt alive. He's trying to frame me." Brody stood up, his eyes hardening. "Save it, Clarence. We'll sort it out at the station." He turned to his deputy, who had just arrived. "Take him in." As the deputy led Clarence away, kicking and protesting, Brody turned to Dusty. "We need to talk, Dusty. A lot." But there was a subtle nod, a hint of understanding in his gaze. For the first time since this nightmare began, Dusty felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could clear his name and protect Mrs. Gable. A new beginning. The aroma of sage and turned earth permeated Dusty's denim as he left the sheriff's office, the twilight ablaze with vermilion and gold. Clarence cooled his heels in a cell, a temporary victory that eased the knot in Dusty's shoulders. Yet, a larger dilemma loomed. Mrs. Gable's future. He discovered her on the porch swing, patches of furry sentinel at her feet, a tranquil tableau that masked recent turmoil. A healthier flush painted her cheeks. "Dusty," she greeted him, her voice still frail but steady. "Join me. We have much to discuss." He settled beside her, the swing's cadence a familiar balm. "How are you feeling, Eleanor?" "Eleanor, please. After all this formality seems absurd. And I feel revived in a sense, though the specifics of my infirmity remain clouded." Dusty hesitated, uncertain how much she recalled. "Clarence, he confessed to attempting to poison you, Eleanor, with something called somnium vitae." Her eyes widened, a glint of steel within. "That weasel. I knew he coveted my money, but I never suspected such lengths. Thank you, Dusty, for saving me." I hardly deserve gratitude," he mumbled, shame prickling his skin. "My motivation was purely selfish, preserving the ranch." Eleanor covered his hand with hers, a surprisingly strong gesture. "We all stumbled, Dusty. Redemption lies in what follows. You risked yourself to safeguard me. That speaks volumes." Besides, a mischievous spark ignited in her eyes. "Sheriff Brody wasn't discreet about your arrangement with Clarence. You were driven, and I recognized that desperation." Dusty met her gaze, surprised by her understanding. Expecting censure, he found instead compassion. "So, now what?" he inquired, the question a fragile thing between them. Eleanor's lips curved into a smile. "Now we rebuild, beginning with this ranch." "This ranch," Dusty repeated, skeptical. "Eleanor, I'm penniless. Foreclosure looms." "Not on my watch," she countered, her voice gaining resonance. "Though memories may elude me, my business sense remains intact. This land holds untapped potential, Dusty. It simply requires vision." And so, they began their planning. Eleanor, with her incisive mind and surprisingly progressive ideas, envisioned possibilities that had eluded Dusty. They resolved to focus on sustainable agriculture, organic produce, and even a quaint bed and breakfast, leveraging the region's natural allure. Eleanor invested significantly, not only in the ranch, but also in the community, employing local talent and bolstering small businesses. The transformation proved profound. The arid fields exploded with a riot of hues, the air thick with the fragrance of wildflowers and freshly turned soil. The dilapidated barn, once teetering on the brink of collapse, was resurrected to its former grandeur, hosting farm-to-table dinners and vibrant community gatherings. The ranch became an emblem of hope, a testament to the power of resilience and the promise of second chances. Dusty, initially hesitant, blossomed under Eleanor's tutelage. He absorbed knowledge about crop rotation, advanced irrigation, and the vital importance of soil vitality. He rediscovered his passion for the land, that deep satisfaction born from working with his hands, nurturing life back into the earth. Evenings unfolded on the porch swing, watching the sun sink below the horizon, exchanging stories and sharing laughter. Patches, an ever-present shadow, rested his head on their laps, basking in their companionship. They were an unconventional family, joined by happenstance and tempered in hardship. One evening, as the constellations began to emerge across the inky canvas of the sky, Dusty addressed Eleanor. "I still struggle to express my gratitude," he confessed, his voice husky with emotion. Eleanor smiled, her eyes glittering in the starlight. "You already have, Dusty. You gave me a second lease on life, and in return, I helped you salvage a ranch. But more significantly, we offered each other something vital, a friend." He studied her, the delicate lines around her eyes, the profound wisdom and kindness etched in her expression, and recognized the truth in her words. They had discovered something extraordinary, something rare and precious, in the most unexpected of circumstances. The ranch, once a monument to Dusty's failings, now stood as a symbol of their shared triumph. It was a haven of new beginnings, of renewed hope, of dreams taking root in the arid landscape. And as he sat there, on the porch swing, with Eleanor beside him and Patches nestled at their feet, Dusty understood that he had finally found his place in the world. He was home,